Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territories of the signatories of Treaty 7, and I acknowledge the Métis people who share a deep connection with this land. I'm Samir Kayande, the Alberta NDP Finance Critic for Fiscal Responsibility. Today, the UCP government released their first quarter update, and it confirmed what we've seen from the UCP for the last 4 years. They can't be trusted to manage your money. They can't be trusted to manage our economy. They can't be trusted to be honest with Albertans. The government wants to take credit for a budget picture that really didn't get better despite good tailwinds from oil prices going up and the Canadian dollar weakening. Today's announcement wasn't just about what was in the first quarter update. It was also about what was missing from the update. It's about what isn't in these documents. The amount that Albertans will have to pay for the UCP's mismanagement of our healthcare system and Albertans' money through the Dynalife contract are still not known. They haven't earmarked even a single dollar for it in the first quarter update. They've botched the process from beginning to end, and now Albertans will have to pay a huge bill, just like the UCP did with Keystone XL. Also not in the update are all of the UCP's campaign promises. The unaccounted campaign promises, along with the Dynalife boondoggle, means that Alberta's surplus is likely much lower than the UCP is telling Albertans. To make matters worse, the UCP has completely mismanaged our economy, which will once again hurt the province's balance sheet. It will hurt Albertans already struggling to make ends meet. Albertans are struggling to pay the bills as wages fail to keep pace with inflation under the UCP. They can't find an affordable place to live. In fact, housing starts are down over the last year, and the UCP is now projecting lower housing starts than they did in the budget, despite an increasing population. This means higher housing costs for Albertans, and the minister even admitted today that Alberta is losing its affordability advantage. It's inevitable, he said. It's not inevitable, but under the UCP, weekly earnings projections are actually forecast to be down compared to the budget. Albertans will fall further and further behind. Meanwhile, Albertans also can't afford to pay their power bills as prices have reached record highs under Danielle Smith. The UCP's answer to soaring electricity? Shut down an entire industry for at least 7 months. Their ban on renewable energy projects will drive away investment and jobs. This will drive up prices. And once again, the impact of their renewables ban was not factored into the first quarter update. Look, the level of resource revenue we are receiving now is wonderful. There's no question about that. We're now harvesting the fruits of the last 40 years of investments supported by every Alberta government all the way back to Lougheed. But who's planting the next orchard? Renewables will be a big part of the next 40 years. It's not just about this fiscal updates, but next year's, the next 5 years, the next decades. To make matters worse, Danielle Smith is actually lying to Albertans about her reasons for this ban and instability in our grid. Today, a news story was published where the ISO revealed that the reason for the grid alert on Monday was not due to natural gas plants being offline, where the ISO revealed that the reason for the grid alert on Monday was due to natural gas plant being offline or being run at reduced capacity due to higher temperatures. However, Danielle Smith continues to mislead Albertans about the reason for this grid alert by blaming low wind production, even though low wind was forecasted for that time period and performed as expected. The reality is, we need all types of energy production on our grid. Lying to Albertans and driving away investment and jobs is not the answer. Thank you. And I'm happy to take your questions.
Okay, we'll start with questions in person, then go to the line. Hannah Said from City News. I asked the minister about Dynalife. The Alberta government announced the transition, but they don't have a plan. They don't have any numbers. What do you have to say about that?
Oh, it's awful. Like it's perfectly awful. So I mean, we had a good lab system. They failed to invest into it. They privatized it. The privatization didn't work. Service collapsed. I've talked to so many of my constituents, cancer patients who can't get their blood tests. It's awful. And so finally, they've done the right thing by going back to a public system for collecting lab samples. But there are very likely, we don't know, there are very likely termination provisions in the contract. They can probably estimate how much this stuff will cost, and they've done none of that. So it's not just like, usually we think about like, okay, the numbers are going to be really bad, but the numbers actually in this case reflect a strategic failure. And, I don't know what's worse. I don't know if it's worse that they don't know what the number is or if they know what the number is and they're not telling us.
Yeah, Tim Brook with CTV. Would the NDP, if it won in May, would the NDP have considered adding in some affordability measures this year that would have been reflected in this fiscal update?
We would absolutely have considered adding in affordability measures, and because people are hurting right now, right? Like it's not. It's not enough to say, like a fiscal surplus and the free market will solve your problems. People need help. Now, there's a way to do that while still reflecting the fiscal constraints that we are under. We can do both of these things, but it takes a government with vision. It takes an approach to governing that's looking at planting the next orchard, right? And both leading to short-run and long-run sustainability. I just don't see the vision evident in that in these numbers that we got today.
On the topic of planting an orchard, then, what do you think needs to happen moving forward as far as wildfire expenses are concerned? Obviously, there was a huge budget line here today. Do you think more money needs to be built into the system to ensure that future years aren't this expensive, or they're just covered for?
We have to plan on these types of contingencies as things that are going to happen. One of the contingency items, actually, I believe I may have misread this. I hope I did, but I think that they actually put like higher debt services costs into that contingency account. And so it's like this contingency account now becomes a place where they just lard all of their unexpected spending. And I would rather have a budgetary process that's honest about the fact that we are in a very different climate regime than we have been over the last 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, and that actually plans for the future as it is rather than how we wished it would be.
Adam McVicker with Global News. I'm curious what the call from the NDP is regarding affordability measures. We know the relief on the gas tax will continue until the end of the year, but what else do you think is needed this year, considering what we're seeing across the province when it comes to housing costs, rental costs, things along those lines as well?
I mean, your question has the answers, right? Like it's about housing costs especially, and I want to take a little bit of an economic lens to this as well. Like we know how much housing affordability is hurting ordinary Calgarians and ordinary Albertans, with rental increases that in some cases are 20%. I'm also hearing from businesses who are telling me they can't hire the people that they need. They can't afford to pay them what they need to pay them in order to live, a lifestyle that they've been accustomed to in Alberta. And so again, I just go back to what Minister Horner said about, hey, it's an inevitability that things are going to get worse. I don't accept that. And I don't think that our government should accept that either.
And I also have a question on the Dynalife situation. The minister said, the deal will hopefully be finalized at the end of this year. Not much information included what that cost will mean for the government of Alberta. What is the expectation of what that cost will be, and how significant would this update maybe be today if those numbers were included?
Oh Lord, we have no idea. Like, I wish I knew, right? I would be surprised if they cancel the deal without having some idea of what the bookends of what a termination and settlement would be. But we just don't know, and that information has not been shared with taxpayers. It hasn't been shared with voters. It's a really good question, and I would really ask the minister.
Okay, we'll go to questions on the line. Our first question goes to Catherine Garkowski.
Sure. So talking about how prices going up when there's this influx in population, you say it isn't inevitable. So what should the government do when there are these growth pressures to head off these challenges in affordability?
So Catherine, I was looking at housing starts statistics from the Alberta dashboard, the Alberta Economic Dashboard, going back a number of years. And in 1978, we had more housing starts than we do this year. In 2006 and 7, I believe we had more housing starts in those years than we do this year. So, something is very broken right now, right? And certainly the combination of both public housing and private housing is not keeping up with the influx of new residents that we have today. It's not typical of other boom time periods. And so, I guess that I would answer that with, just like perplexity on why the provincial government isn't doing enough to make sure that both the private sector is building housing, and why they have actually reduced the amount of spending on public housing over the last 4 years.
Is there a follow-up, Catherine?
Sure. And so this is a first quarter update, and what happened with Dynalife was not in the first quarter. So I'm curious why you think it should be reflected in this report specifically.
I'm going back to my history as a financial analyst. When there's a subsequent event that's material, companies are required to report on what those implications might be, to the extent that they know of them. And perhaps I'm being a little bit naive, thinking that the government should have a private sector level of reporting on these issues. But certainly, if it's a significant cost, I think that they owe it to Albertans to come clean about what that is.
Okay, we'll do one more pass for questions in person. Okay, and no more questions on the line. That's all for today.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.